Welcome to Alchemical Science. I'm Jordan, an open source researcher who investigates ideas that are usually either very old, very new, or very esoteric. Alright, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a lot to unpack today as usual, so we'll get right into it. The big topic for today's update is going to be the Thunderstorm generator build Q&A live stream conducted by Bob Greenyer and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project with Malcolm Bendall that was released the other week. So we'll run through all of the significant points made during this Q&A session. And if you're attempting your own replication or you're still trying to figure out the engineering considerations of the Thunderstorm generator or what the goal is here, this will be a must-watch and a good chance to take a few notes for your build and trials. Before that, though, we will cover the other fusion research that Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project has been releasing recently on their channel. Since the presentation from Anatoly Nikitin, Bob's continued his stream of open source information on previous bubble cavitation and ball lightning or plasmoid experiments. But quickly, I just want to thank you all for helping me reach 10,000 subscribers. We got there a few weeks ago, and I was a little too preoccupied to let it sink in yet. But it's phenomenal to be coming up to the 1-year anniversary of the channel, and it's growing fast and making an impact. People are exploring these ideas from all sorts of angles, and the work I'm doing has clearly resonated quite strongly with the experiences and observations of many of you. So thank you for supporting the channel, whether it's been through liking or sharing the videos, subscribing, or donating to help fund my open source research, or giving me a shout out on your podcast or social media platform. And I'm sorry I'm not able to respond to all messages and comments individually these days. I simply don't have the time or capacity to do it at the moment. But your comments and messages, they nevertheless mean a lot to me. And I hope I have the chance to get to know many of you who are conducting similar research in the field over the long term. So the third and final time for this video, thank you for following along or contributing to the mission. On a personal level, because I know now for sure that there are many, many others out there who think like me and that share a common vision for our future and of our past, perhaps. Remember that you can catch myself as well as Bob, Malcolm, and a host of other revolutionary speakers and scientists at Cosmic Summit 2024 in June in the USA. Tickets are available now on the Cosmic Summit website. And if you want to help me out with a small commission that won't cost you anything extra, you can use the link I've provided in the description. Outside of the new industrial revolution that Malcolm and Bob are starting, but completely related still, the younger dryas theory, which has been spearheaded and promoted by many of the other researchers speaking this year at Cosmic Summit, including Randall Carlson, Johanna James, Brad Young, the host himself, George Howard, and practically everyone speaking in some way or another. We're all very interested in it. Anyway, the comet strike theory that just won't die has recently been receiving some serious mainstream coverage in media like the New York Times. You can go and check out this article for yourself, and it's an absolute breath of fresh air. But at any rate, Cosmic Summit 2024. Don't miss the opportunity to be a part of a pure celebration of critical thinking and good, honest, independent research. Be there or be square. So let's get into the ball lightning plasmoid stuff. As I mentioned earlier, Bob and MFMP have been continuing to absolutely hammer out more evidence of ball lightning, both naturally and synthetically formed, since the video that I summarized on Anatoly Nikitin's presentation. And I won't get too deep into any of these videos that I'm just going to quickly mention here, as our main subject today is the Thunderstorm generator Q&A, but I want to continue to try and spread a bit more awareness about what Bob and MFMP are up to and in the wider sphere of ball lightning and plasmoid research, because it's honestly absolutely wild stuff, and it's insanity that it isn't being covered more or receiving wider attention, I should say. So there's a discussion between Bob and Max Fomitchev-Zamilov from the Maximus Energy Corporation. And Max gives a presentation on his piezoacoustic reactor, the system he designed and built himself, and that he's been performing controlled experiments with for the last 3 years. It's an interesting presentation, and Max is an interesting guy. He's developed several software applications which are used for spectrum analysis in nuclear research labs, which he also uses for his own experiments with his piezoacoustic reactor. He mentions that he's done thousands of experiments with this setup. So a very interesting video. MFMP also posted several videos provided by, I think it was Tony Gibboni, which show a reverse engineering of the Kladov Cavitator, another low-energy fusion device operating on similar principles to the other cavitation and ball lightning devices we discuss here. The Kladov Cavitator can be found in patent number RU2054604C1. Finally, in their most recent video, Bob has released some new SEM EDS analysis done on a magnetically separated sample, which he obtained from a reactor from the labs of Dr. Bin Juan Huang in Taipei. And of course, he finds the same iron-rich crenellated microspheres here that he found during the SEM EDS sessions, analyzing the inside and outside spheres of the Thunderstorm generator. So no matter how it's produced, ball lightning generally forms this magnetic core. These innocuous crenellated spheres give us a telltale sign to identify where the structures have been present and active. The paper co-authored by Dr. Huang, Bob, and their colleagues, and their recent SEM EDS sessions should be a course for scientists the world over to pause for a moment and reassess our current paradigm and trajectory. I've linked to the paper again below in the description in case anyone hasn't seen that yet. And you'll also find a short commentary from Alexander Shishkin in MFMP's recent video section too, just on that same topic. So all of those videos are available on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project YouTube channel. Be sure to go and check out the originals, at least of those you think you'll find enlightening or interesting. But now we will move on to discuss the Q&A session that was held recently for some of the teams and individuals who had reached out to Bob about replicating the Thunderstorm generator. Malcolm Bendall was also invited along to help answer questions, and they discussed a number of important things in relation to the design and the engineering of the Thunderstorm generator, and also gave some updates on where the research and development of the tech is currently at, the new pre-production prototypes, the protection patents, and when the independent global testing teams that have been forming will receive the new prototype for review. But in this video, we'll give a summarized overview of the 3-hour original and go through some of the more significant parts of the discussion point by point. So this is really kind of trying to build on my build guide, just continue to provide good general information for those trying to conduct a build or those waiting out to see mass-produced parts or kits that are interested in the tech. A quick recap of who Bob Greenyer is and the MFMP's involvement with Malcolm and the Thunderstorm generator, though first, just for anyone who's new to the channel or if you want to hear the story in brief fullness. Bob's been pushing the boundaries of cold fusion research through his open source research and practical controlled experimentation for many years now. He's collaborated with and built on the work of many global experts in the field, and although he may not claim the title himself, I believe, and I'm sure many of my audience would agree, that Bob is one of the world's leading pioneers and experts in cavitation and ball lightning research, at least that the Western public have access to. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of the topic, and he's recently been making huge leaps and bounds in helping get these ideas recognized by academia and out there to a more mainstream audience, moving the tech forward to actually being produced. He came to hear of Malcolm's Thunderstorm generator after its public unveiling at the Tesla Tech conference in the US last year, and a mutual contact put them in touch with the aim of Bob independently being able to assess Malcolm's invention and conduct some further investigations as to how it was working. So you can check out all my previous videos covering Bob's other work, but needless to say, he followed through on this request. And he did indeed conduct his own independent analysis of the Thunderstorm generator, which we've covered. He made some astounding discoveries, most of which were published open source, often live and unfiltered. The SEM EDS sessions where Bob analyzes the inside of the outside spheres and the outside of the inside spheres are definitely worth checking out. And also both myself and Johanna James also have videos breaking down the significance of Bob's findings during those sessions. That may be an easier watch for the layman out there. Bob is currently involved in spearheading some official test work to identify the carbon and nitrogen isotopes in the fusion reactions occurring within the Thunderstorm generator unit. And we should know these results very soon, and it could be a game-changing moment for the world at large, depending on what we see here. But we'll get to that in a little more detail soon. For now, though, Malcolm was able to give an update on where they're currently at with the pre-production manufacturing process and what the plan is for the prototype units. He said that 30 units are currently in production. These units are committed to being distributed over the next 3 months as they are produced to Bob and several other independent scientists and researchers who were present during the live Q&A, as well as several of the testers whose work we've previously covered on the channel and some others. The intention here is that the global testing teams that have expressed their interest can all perform their trials using the same standard model design and the same engine, so they can all gather cohesive data. I'll be a part of that effort in my own way. One of the units is committed to my neck of the woods in Australia, and I will be collaborating with the more experienced mechanics down here who worked on the original prototypes some years back to review and document the new and improved model and hopefully demonstrate it for many Australian viewers who've been paying attention on the channel. So we may not be the first on the list here. There are some heavyweight scientists itching to gather data and peer review the thing who have some serious experience and tools at their disposal, including, of course, Bob himself and some of his esteemed colleagues. So these teams obviously need to take priority, but the Australians are on the list. And when it happens, the plan is to, of course, share everything I learn with you guys. We will do more than smell tests this time, I promise. Malcolm has filed protection patents on the new designs via his non-profit Strike Foundation. He's stated several times, though, that this is not to stop anyone building the Thunderstorm generator. It's simply to protect it from being exploited or once again locked up like many inventions that have come before it that have been similar. Or in other words, he'd be silly not to protect it. So the aim of the Strike Foundation itself is to educate the world about plasmoid tech and the science behind it, something which Malcolm believes, and I agree with him, is integrally important to the future prosperity of humanity. So these 30 pre-production test units and the designs contained in the new patents are an updated and modified design to the original you'll find in my DIY build guide video. So there's been a lot of work done to optimize the retrofit over the last few months. It's still the same fundamental design as the original. There's no change in the principles of how the newer improved units function. But Malcolm says that they have made a lot of improvements based on the more recent test work. For example, he mentions they've optimized both the material properties of the custom-made parts through things like annealing and pressure quenching processes on the metal of the spheres and the tubes of the Thunderstorm generator unit. And they've been able to solve the dreaded vacuum leaks and other issues that could occur when running the system for longer periods of time, simply by finding more appropriate parts to handle the pressure generated within the chambers. So if you're trying to build your own, take note that you will need to use air conditioner fittings and ensure that you epoxy all the joins and then turn them the other way and epoxy them again, Malcolm says. There must be absolutely no vacuum leaks. The standard water pipe fittings, they're generally not going to keep a vacuum over the long term or maybe even in the short term, perhaps at all. And Malcolm stressed that maintaining an absolutely airtight hermetic seal throughout the whole system is integral to it working. The retrofit is simply an extension to both the air intake and the exhaust of the combustion engine. And just like the engine, vacuum and pressure must be maintained in the retrofit for the reactions to take place as intended. So ensure your seals here, do your pressure tests as thoroughly as possible before you run the unit. The geometry in the new models has also been fine-tuned to incorporate the 51.84 degree angle transition between the spheres and the pipe, something which had not been done on the original prototypes, although it had already been planned in the original designs, and it's included in my DIY build guide video and Nikita Volt's diagrams and models that we provided there. So they've also fine-tuned the diameter and the length of the nested pipes, the standard engine they've chosen for testing now. Malcolm did mention some dimensions of the pipes that we're using in the new units. They're now using much shorter pipes, only 3 and 2 inches long rather than 24 inches. So 3 and 2 are, of course, highly harmonic numbers, as is 24. And the numbers themselves are all important in the context of measurement when we make calculations using imperial units like inches, feet, and miles. You can see more about that in Malcolm's PUM. The 3-inch long pipe is between the 2 outer 4-inch spheres, and the 2-inch long pipe is between 2 inner 3-inch spheres. Malcolm refers to this new design as stubby for this reason. The optimal inner diameter of the pipes for the new designs has been standardized to 1 inch. And note that this is the inner diameter, not the outer diameter of the pipe. There's a big difference between the two, and this will obviously drastically alter the results depending on which one you go off. And I would assume that as they're using a 1 inch outer pipe, this would mean that they're using a 1/2 inch inner diameter pipe for the inner nested pipe. As the pipes, they always need to be an octave apart, i.e. double or half the ratio of one another. And this hasn't changed, and Malcolm mentions it again during the Q&A, so we can safely assume 1 inch and 1/2 inch, I believe. Stubbier pipes. Malcolm says that when the engine is run at full load, within the spheres and the pipes of their new optimized prototype, some filaments, the plasmoids, can be seen flashing from the outside of the device, but they don't escape. So ultimately, the dimensions of your pipes are going to be quite dependent on the size and the specs of the engine you're using. And we want to contain the plasmoids, not let them escape through the metal walls of the reaction chamber. If this is happening, I guess you've gone too small with your pipe diameters, or at least this could be one of the reasons. But if you don't see the occasional flash on the outside of the metal at all while the unit's running at full load, I guess this could be a sign that you may have oversized the pipe diameter. I don't know. That's a little bit of something to go off. At any rate, Malcolm and his R&D team have settled on a 1 inch and a 1/2 inch diameter nested pipes for their standard pre-production test model. And the optimum thickness of the steel for bolting and spinning for all of these parts, I believe, has been found to be 3 millimeters still. So Bob explains the reason for these stubbier pipes in the new design. In the earlier prototype he checked out last year and published a video on, he observed that there was a pulling in of the central tube on one of the spheres. So it had moved around 6 millimeters from its original position. And he explains that when you have a long nested pair of tubes and the inner tube is hotter than the outer, you'll have a differential of thermal coefficient of expansion. The 6 millimeters that Bob observed the pipe had moved in this differential, was this differential. By making the tube shorter, more stubby, there is less chance of this happening. So using stainless steel will also reduce this happening, and I think this is what we said in the build guide as well, as it has a lower thermal conduction compared to other widely available metals. And the other reason for both of these choices is to help speed up the flash to steam happening in this stage of the system so that it happens as fast as possible. We want to encourage the thermocatalytic splitting of water, and incorporating iron into the alloy of the metal and making the pipes shorter will both aid in speeding up this reaction. Someone asked the question, could the Thunderstorm generator be made from glass? I have actually asked Malcolm this question myself before. It'd certainly be pretty cool to see inside the sphere. It's very curious. And the answer is that Malcolm believes it could be done, but that it would be far less effective than if stainless steel was used. So the geometry of the spheres and the pipes do play a large role in producing the results we've seen. Malcolm estimates about 50%. And if the geometry and the ratios were maintained so that the dueling vortex and counter vortex are formed, doing it all in glass would still produce a result, he says. So as we mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit more later about though, iron does play an important role too. And stainless steel has so far yielded the best results compared to other materials. And you can find out more about the specific alloys of stainless steel used in my original build guide video, so go and check that out if you're still unsure. The spheres are still at a ratio of 4:3:2, which is no surprise, as this is perhaps the most fundamental part of the Thunderstorm generator's design. It can be constructed without using the 2-inch sphere at all, but the result would not be as good. The 2-inch sphere acts as a flow guide for the input stream, and Malcolm says that removing it can also cause overcharging of the system or overheating of the engine bay. And this may be something to look out for if you're seeing too many visible filaments flashing, like we mentioned before. Another thing Bob notes that we should be aware of, and most people who work with combustion engines probably already are aware of, is that engines will run better in cold air. However, they can also be more efficient with more moisture. And I've seen a lot of comments about this. We know. But this can also be dependent on the timing of how and when the moisture in the air flashes to steam. So the moisture can help out, but in the case of the Thunderstorm generator, it's still all dependent on the timing. So this leads us onto the bubbler. The timing and the pressure initially generated by the engine is used to create a water hammer effect in the bubbler unit, using the bubbler like a one-way valve and amplifying the pressure. When the moisture is vacuumed into the Thunderstorm generator unit during each stroke of the engine, it will quickly flash to steam. The pressure this creates only has two ways to go: continue being vacuumed into the engine or return back to the bubbler chamber, where there is a load of water and stainless steel in the way, and then we'll get this hammer effect. So this creates much higher pressure going into the engine than if you were just otherwise spraying moisture in it, and the timing of it all accentuates the whole process. So if you check out Bob's original video, you can hear him explain a bit more about the conditions we want to create here. He makes some interesting comparisons to the process of the probably less well-known Armstrong electrostatic boiler, which produced impressive amounts of power using similar processes, of steam at least. Of course, this is just one of the processes involved in the overall reaction, which causes the transmutation of carbon to oxygen. It's not just water vapor or hydrogen being captured and utilized here. Minute plasmoids are already being formed at this stage of the system via symmetrical water bubble cavitation. You can find out more about this in many of my previous videos, including the DIY build guide, as well as in Malcolm's notes, which can be found on strikefoundation.earth. And soon his new website, strikefoundation.org. I'm not sure that's up yet, but he said it was changing soon. Malcolm also reminds us that it's the bubbles that we can't see, around maybe 1 micron in diameter or less, that we need to form in this part of the process. We need microbubbles because larger bubbles will not symmetrically implode to propagate microball lightning, which will form into larger clusters during the next phase of the process. And Bob adds that we want to encourage large parameter sweeping in any cavitation system. So the many different angles of the stainless steel wool stuffed in the bubbler chamber here will produce many different sized bubbles. And this will increase the likelihood of some of the bubbles being exactly within the parameters that we would require for viable cavitation and the formation of ball lightning. The question's been asked whether carbonated water, water infused with CO2, does anything different, or if anything else other than pure water can be used in the bubbler. And the answer to both of these questions is yes. Malcolm says they've tried carbonated water, and that sends the motor crazy. More carbon to split apart and produce hydrogen and oxygen, I guess. And as for trying other things in the bubbler, he says that they are currently trialing using tip leachates in there, and they have done some trials on that before. Although I certainly don't recommend anyone really tries this at home at this stage. There are some other suggestions regarding this in Malcolm's notes about things to put in the bubbler, but I'll leave those for the more adventurous to go and seek out for themselves. So moving on to the ionization chamber, again, all of this is already mentioned in my DIY build guide accurately already, I believe. But to reiterate, this is the model of UV light that Bob recommends to use here. It's important to note that this is a no ozone bowl, and it's low enough frequency to be not quite as dangerous to the eyes. You could try out higher frequency bulbs, but these do pose a significant risk to your eyes and perhaps to other parts of you, and they shouldn't really be used unless you know what you're doing and you have the appropriate safety equipment and experience. And so the aim with this earlier stage of the system is to create as much hydrogen as possible without ionizing the oxygen. Any extra hydrogen that can be generated and fed through with the air into the bubbler in the next chamber and then used in the reaction process will be helpful. And so it'll all just amplify the gains produced by the subsequent reactions in the bubbler and the Thunderstorm generator. So we don't want to produce ozone though, because oxygen has a much stronger paramagnetic moment. The paramagnetic nature of oxygen is used to help bind the charge clusters together, producing the core structures of ball lightning later in the system. So Bob's previously recommended using titanium oxide as a potential material for the outer casing of the ionization chamber, but just plastic or stainless steel have been used in the prototypes so far, generally plastic. So that's about all for the ionization chamber for now. Another important thing to note that Malcolm reiterated here, any control trials must be conducted before the Thunderstorm generator retrofit is turned on for the first time. If you don't do this, there won't be another chance. The spheres and even the metal inside the engine itself will soon become conditioned or infused with plasmoids. And Malcolm says the effect is usually significantly noticeable after about 20 hours of initial runtime, but this could obviously significantly vary depending on what you're doing. In other words, some charge clusters, the ball lightning, they'll embed themselves in the metal while the unit is running, and they will not necessarily dissipate when the unit is turned off. Some structures inevitably will find themselves a longer-term home in the metal and continue to do some work. Malcolm has observed a 50% reduction in carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide from an engine that was connected only just with the Thunderstorm unit, so no bubbler or ionizer. And this particular Thunderstorm unit had not been used for 5 or 6 years at this point. It had been used before that. But even after this time, the unit had stayed conditioned and continued to perform some work when it was reinstalled without the bubbler and the ionizer. So Bob notes that Ken Shoulders also reported that plasmoids or exotic vacuum objects could stay in metal indefinitely until a reaction is intentionally caused or the structure equalizes. Malcolm says that the geometry of the spheres and the transitions and the ratios between the nested parts and the materials used to construct the unit are all designed to create a suitable home for plasmoids to live. So the 6-plane cubical atomic structure of the ion in the metal of the Thunderstorm generator unit is the ideal home for a plasmoid. They'll be happy to stay at the center of this perfect cube as long as they're excited, absorbing energy from the cube. The goal of this annealing work that's being done on the new prototypes has been to have no stress fields and for all the faces of the atomic cubes of the ion to be projecting to the center of the device. This may sound like an incredibly simple explanation of something that's far more complex, but I don't think it is. I think it's a very curious explanation with a lot more depth than may be immediately apparent. We use all sorts of languages to describe things. Some are better at describing things than others, though. For example, Sanskrit is factually a more precise and harmonic language than English. It's practically incorruptible, and there's an almost mathematical rhyme and reason to how the words and phrases are built. And this is not the case with English, which was built on pretty bad foundations, primarily a mix of Anglo-Saxon, German, and French. And it was once so unstructured that scientists at the time, they had to dump a ton of Latin back in so that the language had a mechanism to categorize and describe things properly, to conduct science. So ever since, whenever there wasn't an English description sufficient to describe something in less than a paragraph, we've continued to scavenge words primarily from French and German, but I'm digressing a bit. I love talking about language. At any rate, the point I'm making is that some languages are more useful than others, and one man may know a word or a phrase to describe something that couldn't be described with 1,000 words using a different language. So when Malcolm says something that sounds a little too simple, like plasmoids will be happy to live at the center of a perfect cube and absorb energy indefinitely, don't be deceived into thinking this is not a precise and accurate explanation of exactly what's going on. It's a loaded statement, and it tells us a lot more than any technical explanation for the phenomena that I've heard so far. He's speaking in precise terms of form and function. And I'm sure I'm not qualified to give it, but my genuine advice to anyone who truly wants to understand the work of Malcolm Bendall, make sense of his notes, make sense of what he's saying, is to forget physics and chemistry and start studying music and geometry. Randall Carlson has a sacred geometry course over on HowTube that's a fantastic starting point for anyone interested in beginning that journey. The Thunderstorm generator is ultimately designed to accelerate and de-accelerate time within its boundaries. We can manipulate time using geometry, just as we can manipulate sound using space. And this is why the 51.84 degree angle, the 4:3:2 ratio, and the ion that Malcolm employs in the Thunderstorm generator will make all the difference in the world. We will be getting into this topic a lot more in my future videos, and we'll continue to try and build the bridge between the maths and the technology and the strange concepts. But a last quote from Malcolm on this: I spent 7 years trying to forget all the names on my island. Names describe processes. I prefer to think of processes rather than names. Otherwise, you never actually think about the processes, just about the names. But back to the build itself. Essentially, make sure all your controls are finished before turning on the valve for the retrofit for the first time, and be sure to test the unit without the bubbler and the ionization chamber attached periodically later on after the unit's been run and the metal's had a chance to condition to find out what happens there. Obviously, there have been some major advancements on the new prototypes in this regard with the annealing, with the metal. It doesn't mean you can't build one with hardware store variety half spheres, as was suggested in the build guide. The original prototypes used these, and they still did produce a result. But the reality is, properly annealing the spheres and altering the material properties is quite integral to optimizing the retrofit, and it will just make life a whole lot easier when there are affordable mass-produced parts and complete systems or retrofit kits available that have undergone these processes and have been already sized and tuned to specific motors. So obviously we hope to see these available at some point in the near future, but understand there is a way to go. We are still in research and development territory, and there's a lot of different things that needs to be engineered properly to fit on just one thing. So what we do know for sure is that we will see global independent testing of the new production, pre-production units, and this is going to be a big step forward towards that. So a quick note here, I get a few emails from you all about the commercial or the production or the investment side of things, but I'm not really the person to answer those questions. I am in contact with Malcolm regularly, but our relationship is that of a student and teacher, and my focus is primarily on learning, open sourcing, explaining, and building on his work as best I can. But Alpha Prospects are the licensees of the commercial rights for the Thunderstorm generator in several countries, and they've been working with Malcolm and funding the R&D of the Thunderstorm generator for a number of years now. So if you want to inquire about investment or mass production, it would be best to get in touch directly with Alpha Prospects. So I provided their website here and the email for Kevin Baker, one of their representatives. He was quite helpful and responsive when I reached out to them recently, and he said he's happy to take any general inquiries on this side of things. So get in touch with Alpha directly if you want to talk about that. I'm just an independent covering this stuff and trying to learn it as best I can. So moving on, Bob gives a little bit of a warning about carbon monoxide emissions when you're dealing with standard combustion engines like generators and cars, etc. If you check out the manual of your generator, you'll find out that we may have been overlooking just how much carbon monoxide they emit and the danger that it poses. In the Honda generator manual that Bob references in the Q&A video, contained multiple warnings about keeping the generator over 25 feet away from a building, even with closed windows and doors. So this is actually quite shocking, and I've never heard it before, to be honest. Should read the manuals, I guess. But of course, this is actually a problem that the Thunderstorm generator remedies, as it reduces the carbon monoxide emissions of an engine to pretty close to zero, very low safe levels at any rate. So funnily enough, I did have a comment the other week saying, if you guys really believed it would work, you'd lock yourself in a room with it. And I thought, well, that's not a safe plan. It's not a bad idea. It would prove a point. So I'm glad to say that Bob did indeed actually spend around 8 hours in a room, just with the doors cracked, sitting right next to an engine fitted with the Thunderstorm generator running, and he did not die. And his carbon monoxide sensor didn't go off either. I probably should mention that first. But being a pragmatic fellow, to check his sensor was working properly, Bob tried running the engine outside with the Thunderstorm generator not attached. And his sensor immediately went off, even when 7 or 8 meters away from the exhaust. So in short, someone already has volunteered as the canary and sat themselves in a room with the Thunderstorm generator running next to them for hours. It's not what we could call a controlled study, but it really doesn't get much more raw than that. And the carbon monoxide sensor doesn't go off. You can go and see Bob's video on that. Go have a look at the MFMP channel to see him talk about it. And he is not feeling ill after this experience, or he's not dead. So, it proves a point. On to the next point. Bob spoke a little more during the Q&A about the isotope analysis being independently done on the Thunderstorm generator spheres that I mentioned in the previous video I did covering this. And he said he should hopefully have the results back this week. So there are a couple specific things that Bob will be looking for in the results. For example, if they find that the ratios of carbon 14 or 13 over carbon 12 where nitrogen 15 over nitrogen 14 are out of whack, this would imply that there is stepwise transmutation occurring, Bob's words. So I won't go through the full implications of this until we see those test results and we hear Bob's analysis. But essentially, if this is the case, the Thunderstorm generator will have proven to be an affordable catch-all solution to practically all carbon emission-related issues. And this is going to be game-changing for a number of reasons. It means that we could sustainably continue to use carbon-based fuels at our current rate of consumption for hundreds of years, if worse comes to worse, while we more slowly transition to replace our existing infrastructure with new forms of fusion power generation. So Bob mentions that even if we don't use oil or coal in the long term, we actually have an even larger supply of methane hydrate gases evaporating yearly from the tundra, which are available to harness as fuel, but which we currently do absolutely nothing with. And this is suddenly an important long-term resource if we have a way forward to control and limit carbon emissions and further refine the combustion engine. The other point is that in larger cities, particularly in more densely populated countries such as India, the smog has gotten seriously bad, and breathing this in all the time, it undeniably has a terrible long-term consequence on human health and the population. So ultimately, even if you don't buy into the mainstream political media narrative about climate change, which I myself do not for the record, I hope everyone can acknowledge that if we're going to continue on with combustion engines, we do need to use them more efficiently. We need to stop smoking up our cities, and this could be our solution. You know, Malcolm said from the start, this carbon coming out of this is fuel. This is fuel. We need to use it. We're just wasting it at the moment. This isn't like a narrative. This is just a stupidity, frankly. Like, we haven't designed the engine right. We need to make this change. It was announced previously, but confirmed again in this recent video, that Malcolm and his team are currently working with the Indian Navy and several other large government entities in multiple nations. So the US, UK, and Saudi Arabia were all mentioned in some way during the Q&A. And it's very likely that these collaborations will play a big part in the mass rollout of the tech, should this end up coming about soon. Moving on to another point, still on the topic of cleaning up carbon, the question was asked, does the Thunderstorm generator decrease the life of the engine? And the answer here so far is no. It actually prolongs the life of the engine because it cleans up the buildup of carbon residues throughout the whole system. So it removes the carbon residues from the actual engine and the oil itself, not just in the Thunderstorm generator unit, if they happen to be there. So this alone is seriously handy. It means never needing to change oil again, potentially, and no carbon residue to build up in the engine. So Malcolm says he recently got sample results back showing an engine with visibly carbon-encrusted dirty oil that had been used for a total of about 2,000 hours runtime beforehand. And after 5 minutes of running that with the Thunderstorm generator installed, the oil had completely cleaned up, and they did analysis on it at this point. So there was no soot or carbon crystals left when the oil samples were analyzed. The unit will actually clean out the inside of the system, and we've known this for a while, but just confirming again. Another question was if the prolonged exposure of the metal elements in the generator to plasmoids would cause them to deteriorate more quickly. In the SEM sessions, we saw, the ripping up of some metal, which I guess is the reason for this question. But the answer here is that it is possible that some of the metal could get moved around by the ball lightning structures, which could mean that parts eventually do need to be replaced. If we balance this out with the fact that we don't get the buildup of carbon residue, it feels like this is still going to turn out to be a very good trade-off. But Bob notes, and I agree, that the carbon in the system should regulate this disintegration of metal parts to some extent, mitigate it. And if this is the case, protective carbon coatings or alloys could also be used to mitigate or completely prevent the issue of any potentially accelerated degradation of the metal part. The carbon takes the hit and then regulates that voltage to the iron, prevents it from degrading, protects it a little. In regards to the optimal choice of fuel to use with the tech, Malcolm and Bob recommended methane as the cleanest and best reactant that is widely available. One last question was asked that we can quickly cover. Can the engine run on water? And the answer here is no. Technically speaking, it doesn't actually require fuel as such to run, which is perhaps where this misconception comes from. But the retrofit will need a minimum of around 10% carbon from the exhaust of whatever you're putting into it, or it is unlikely to be able to do much of the stage. This aligns with previous experiments and observations involving the technology with similar processes. You can head over to MFMP to hear more of Bob's voluminous library of references if you wish to investigate this topic further, but you do need carbon in the system, and they mention around 10%. Obviously, that's not a set thing. You can play around with it, but there needs to be carbon. Not necessarily an engine, but carbon and a few other factors. And I think we've about reached the end of this update. There was actually a lot of points here that I could expand upon a fair bit, and perhaps a few more that we could have gone over, as it's been a little while now since we've talked about the physical prototypes. But I want to keep this fairly concise and not go too deep into one rabbit hole. There was a lot of great stuff, for example, in the original video about energy storage of fuel and of a battery. The fact, that a battery is for storing energy. Fuel already has energy, these hydrocarbon fuel sources or the other options we discussed. So go check out the original if you want to see Bob and Malcolm and the others discuss some of those things. But yeah, I'll be continuing to cover Bob's work along with bringing my own perspective and more about the mathematics and building that bridge between Malcolm's Plasmoid unification model and the tech itself in my future videos. So if you're not yet subscribed to the channel and you've got this far through the video, come on, help me out a bit. Hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and share this video as widely as you can. Like the video. Do all of those things, please. Thank you as usual to Malcolm, Bob, and the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project for continuing to open source some of the most important information we, the humble public, have had access to in decades. And thank you also, my friends, for watching. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time.